He commanded stages and conquered hearts, but Elvis Presley was never truly free. From the moment he signed his first contract, invisible strings pulled him in directions he never chose, strings controlled by Colonel Parker, studio executives, government agencies, and shadowy figures who understood that controlling the king meant controlling America's youth. Behind every song, every movie, every public appearance was a careful orchestration designed to maximize profit and minimize rebellion. This is the story of how the most powerful entertainer in history became the entertainment industry's most valuable puppet, and how the very people who made him a legend slowly strangled the man behind the myth. Colonel Tom Parker's office in the William Morris Building reeked of cigar smoke and broken dreams as he spread the contracts across his mahogany desk like a general planning a military campaign. Each document represented another thread in the web he'd spent years weaving around Elvis Presley, a web so intricate that the king himself couldn't see the boundaries of his cage. "The boy's getting restless," Parker muttered to his assistant, studying the latest reports from Graceland. "He's been talking about wanting to do serious movies, maybe even that European tour again." What Elvis didn't know, what Parker would never let him know, was that the colonel wasn't just his manager. He was a contractor, employed by a consortium of interests that saw Elvis as their most valuable asset and their greatest threat. Hollywood studios, record executives, government agencies, and even organized crime figures had invested too much in controlling America's cultural king to let him develop independent ideas. The phone rang with sharp urgency. Parker recognized the voice, immediately cold, precise, anonymous. "The subject is becoming problematic. We've intercepted communications suggesting he wants to fire you and manage himself." Parker's blood chilled. After 20 years of carefully constructed control, Elvis was beginning to see the strings. "I can handle him." "You'd better. Too many people have too much invested in the current arrangement. If he breaks free, if he starts making his own decisions about tours, movies, political statements." The voice didn't need to finish the threat. Parker understood perfectly. Elvis Presley speaking his own mind, choosing his own projects, expressing his own political views was a nightmare scenario for those who profited from his controlled rebellion. His music was dangerous enough when carefully managed, unleashed, and undirected. It could reshape society itself. "What do you need from me?" Parker asked. "Increase the medication protocols. Dr. Nicopolis has been too conservative. We need the subject more compliant." Parker winced. The prescription drug regimen they developed for Elvis was already extensive: amphetamines to keep him performing, sedatives to keep him calm, painkillers to keep him dependent. But increasing the dosages meant risking his health, possibly his life. That's dangerous territory. Not as dangerous as letting him wake up to what's been done to him. After the call ended, Parker stared out his window at the Los Angeles skyline, each glittering tower representing another fortune built on controlled rebellion, manufactured dreams, and carefully managed stars. Elvis was their golden goose, but golden geese who learned to fly away were quickly turned into dinner. The contracts on his desk told the story of a life systematically stripped of autonomy. Movie deals that locked Elvis into formulaic roles for years ahead, recording agreements that gave him no creative control, touring arrangements that kept him perpetually traveling and never settling long enough to think clearly about his situation. Every aspect of Elvis's life had been architected to maintain dependence. His divorce from Priscilla had been orchestrated to increase his emotional vulnerability. His financial arrangements ensured he never accumulated enough independent wealth to break free. Even his famous generosity, the cars, the jewelry, the houses he gave away, was encouraged because it kept him financially dependent on the very system that enslaved him. Parker opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small vial of pills. Nick would receive these tomorrow, along with instructions to increase Elvis's evening medication. The king was getting too curious, asking too many questions about contracts and percentages and overseas touring rights. It was time to remind Elvis, who really wore the crown in this kingdom and who held the power to take it away. A puppet needed to remember his strings, or those strings might just become a noose. Tomorrow, Parker would fly to Memphis with a new contract and a broad smile, ready to convince Elvis that his recent concerns were just paranoia brought on by stress. And if the king resisted, well, there were always more pills to help him see reason. The web was tightening, and somewhere in Graceland, Elvis Presley had no idea how trapped he truly was. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's executive boardroom felt like a mausoleum as the studio heads reviewed the quarterly Elvis Presley profit reports. To them, he wasn't a person. He was Product E, their most reliable revenue generator, churning out formulaic movies that made millions while slowly destroying his artistic soul. His latest tantrum about wanting to do serious acting is becoming a problem, announced Harold Robbins, MGM's head of production. He actually turned down 3 picture deals this month. And men around the conference table, studio executives, distribution chiefs, international sales directors shifted uncomfortably. Elvis refusing projects meant disrupted production schedules, disappointed international buyers, and most importantly, reduced profits. What's his current psychological profile? Asked David Begelman from Columbia Pictures, who attended these inter-studio meetings because Elvis's cooperation affected the entire Hollywood ecosystem. Dr. Margaret Kemp, a psychiatrist on the studio's payroll, consulted her files. Subject: shows increasing resistance to authority, growing awareness of his artistic limitations, and dangerous signs of independent thinking. His medication compliance is irregular. For 15 years, the major studios had perfected the Elvis formula: 3 pictures per year, minimal artistic input, maximum commercial appeal. The king had been reduced to a singing mannequin, his natural charisma and talent channeled into sanitized entertainment that threatened no one and offended no authority. The European art film directors have been contacting him again, Robbins continued. Fellini, Antonioni, even Kubrick, if he starts working with real filmmakers. Implication hung heavy in the air. Elvis collaborating with visionary directors, expressing genuine artistic ambition, using his global platform for meaningful communication. It was every studio executive's nightmare. Increase the financial pressure, suggested Begelman. Make sure his expenses exceed his income. Desperate men don't make artistic choices. This was the beauty of their system. Elvis earned millions, but through carefully structured deals, he never accumulated true wealth. His movie contracts paid him upfront fees that sounded enormous to the public, but represented tiny percentages of actual profits. Meanwhile, his expenses, Graceland's maintenance, his staff's salaries, his family's lifestyle were carefully inflated to ensure constant financial pressure. The prescription protocol needs adjustment, Dr. Kemp added. I recommend increasing his amphetamine intake before contract negotiations. Impaired judgment works in our favor. The room fell silent as they contemplated the moral implications of deliberately damaging Elvis's mental state for business purposes. But moral considerations had been abandoned long ago when they'd realized that controlling Elvis Presley meant controlling a significant portion of American popular culture. What about the touring situation? Asked MGM's international division head. Parker keeps blocking overseas dates. We could make hundreds of millions from a European tour. Parker has his orders, Robbins replied cryptically. Elvis stays domestic, stays controllable. International exposure means international media, and international media asks uncomfortable questions. The truth was darker than even these executives fully understood. Elvis's global popularity made him a potential diplomatic weapon. His opinions on war, politics, or social issues could influence millions of young people worldwide. keeping him confined to American venues, American media, American handlers. Ensured his voice remained manageable. "There's something else," Dr. Kemp said, her voice dropping. "He's been asking questions about his father's military service, about his own draft deferments. If he starts connecting certain dots about how his career was managed during the war years, ... double quotes, more uncomfortable silence. Elvis's brief military service had been carefully orchestrated theater, designed to maintain his image while ensuring he remained under institutional control. His assignment to Germany, his introduction to Priscilla, even his chance encounters with certain intelligence operatives, none of it had been coincidental. Status report on his inner circle? Robbins asked. The Memphis Mafia remains loyal but uninformed. They see themselves as protecting him from outside threats. They don't realize they're part of the containment system. Robbins stood, signaling the meeting's end. "Gentlemen, let's remember what's at stake." Elvis Presley, uncontrolled, could reshape entertainment, influence politics, inspire actual rebellion instead of managed dissent. Our job is to keep him profitable, popular, and powerless. As the executives filed out, each returned to their offices to implement another layer of control over the most famous man in the world. New contracts would be drafted with even more restrictive terms. New medications would be prescribed for manufactured ailments. New financial pressures would be applied to ensure compliance. Somewhere in Memphis, Elvis was probably staring at his gold records, wondering why success felt so much like imprisonment. He didn't yet understand that his cage was made of contracts instead of bars, but the effect was identical. The studios had created a monster of fame, and now they had to keep it chained forever. The windowless conference room deep in the basement of the J. Edgar Hoover building hummed with the tension of classified secrets as FBI Deputy Director William Sullivan spread Elvis Presley's surveillance files across the steel table. For over a decade, the Bureau had maintained what they euphemistically called cultural monitoring operations. In reality, the systematic control of America's most influential entertainers. Subject continues to demonstrate concerning independence. Sullivan reported to the assembled intelligence officials. Representatives from the CIA, NSA, and military intelligence sat in shadow, their faces obscured by the harsh overhead lighting that left Elvis's photographs looking like crime scene evidence. Agent provocateur was too kind a term for what Elvis had become. With a single song, he could shift the mood of an entire generation. With one political statement, he could influence voting patterns across multiple demographics. With his global reach and cross-cultural appeal, he represented a potential weapon of cultural diplomacy if he remained under their control. The subject's recent comments about Vietnam have been problematic, continued a voice from the CIA contingent. 3 separate foreign intelligence services have attempted contact through intermediaries. This was the nightmare scenario they'd spent years preventing. Elvis's popularity in communist countries, despite official censorship, made him an irresistible target for enemy recruitment. A single public statement opposing American foreign policy could undermine years of propaganda efforts. What's his current psychological profile? Asked the NSA Representative Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, architect of the MK Ultra program, consulted. His files. Subject shows increasing resistance to pharmaceutical compliance and growing suspicion of authority figures. The medication protocols are becoming less effective. For years, they'd maintained Elvis's malleability through a carefully managed combination of prescription drugs, financial pressure, and social isolation. His famous generosity, his impulsive decision-making, his emotional volatility, all enhanced and controlled through pharmaceutical intervention. The Memphis surveillance station reports he's been asking questions about his phone records, Sullivan added grimly. He may be becoming aware of the monitoring. Every call from Graceland was recorded. Every visitor was photographed. Every piece of mail was photocopied before delivery. The FBI maintained a complete real-time portrait of Elvis's life, relationships, and psychological state. Recommendation? Asked the senior CIA official. Escalation of Operation Mockingbird protocols, Sullivan replied. Increase media manipulation to discredit any political statements he might make. Plant stories about drug use, mental instability, declining popularity. Operation Mockingbird was the CIA's media control program, designed to shape public opinion through planted stories, controlled journalists, and manufactured scandals. If Elvis started expressing independent political views, they were prepared to destroy his credibility systematically. What about the Colonel Parker situation? Asked military intelligence. Sullivan smiled grimly. Parker remains cooperative. His own legal vulnerabilities ensure continued compliance with directives. What Elvis didn't know was that Colonel Parker was an illegal immigrant with connections to organized crime figures who were themselves government assets. Parker's control over Elvis wasn't just commercial, it was intelligence work, keeping America's most influential entertainer safely contained within acceptable parameters. The Priscilla Presley operation has been a success, Dr. Gottlieb added. Her presence provides emotional stability while maintaining surveillance capabilities within the household. The room fell silent as they contemplated the implications. Elvis's marriage, his most intimate relationship, was partially an intelligence operation. Priscilla had been identified, cultivated, and positioned not just as a romantic partner, but as an unwitting intelligence asset. International touring remains prohibited? Asked the CIA representative. Absolutely, Sullivan confirmed. Subjects' global influence outside controlled American venues represents unacceptable security risk. They'd spent years sabotaging Elvis's attempts to tour internationally, using everything from visa complications to security concerns to financial obstacles. The rest of the world knew Elvis only through carefully filtered American media. His live presence, his authentic voice, his potential for spontaneous political expression remained safely quarantined. Status of the termination protocols? Asked the senior official quietly. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dr. Gottlieb shuffled papers uncomfortably before answering. Protocols remain theoretical. Current containment measures are preferable to permanent solutions. But everyone in the room understood the implication. If Elvis Presley ever became too independent, too politically dangerous, too difficult to control, there were contingency plans that went far beyond career destruction. Maintain current surveillance levels, Sullivan concluded. Increase pharmaceutical interventions. Continue media manipulation protocols. The subject must remain manageable. As the officials dispersed into the darkness of the federal building, Elvis Presley continued his performance at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, unaware that every gesture was being analyzed, every word recorded, every breath monitored. By the very government he'd served in the Army, the king of rock and roll was also the most watched man in America, and his watchers were losing patience with his growing desire for freedom. The International Hotel's presidential suite felt like a gilded prison as Elvis stared at the collection of pill bottles arranged across his coffee table like chess pieces in a game he was finally beginning to understand. Each prescription bore a different doctor's name. Each promised to solve a different problem. But together, they formed a chemical straitjacket that had been controlling his mind for years. Mr. Presley? Dr. Nicopolis's voice carried false concern as he entered the suite. You missed your evening medications. Elvis didn't look up from the bottles. For the first time in decades, his mind felt clear, dangerously, brilliantly clear. The fog of pharmaceuticals was lifting, and what he saw in its absence terrified and enraged him in equal measure. Tell me something, Doc, Elvis said quietly. How many people gave you orders about my prescriptions? Dr. Nick's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his medical bag. I don't understand the question. Sure you do. Elvis finally raised his eyes, and Dr. Nick flinched at the intelligence burning their intelligence that had been chemically suppressed for so long that its return was like staring into the sun. Parker calls you. The studio executives call you. Hell, I bet even some folks in Washington call you. All of them very concerned about my mental health. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope over an abyss. Dr. Nick had been briefed. For this scenario, the moment when Elvis might achieve enough mental clarity to see the web of control surrounding him. His instructions were clear. Increase sedation immediately, restore chemical compliance, maintain the status quo. Elvis, you're not thinking clearly. The stress of performing, the pressure of being a puppet. Elvis stood slowly, his presence filling the room like gathering thunder. 23 years, Doc. 23 years since I walked into Sun Records, and I'm just now realizing I haven't made a single real decision since. The pills scattered across the floor as Elvis swept his arm across the coffee table. Hundreds of capsules and tablets, uppers, downers, painkillers, anti-anxiety medications rolled across the expensive carpet like confetti at a funeral. Every song chosen for me, every movie scripted for me, every tour route planned for me, even my wife selected for me. Elvis laughed bitterly. They found a 14-year-old girl in Germany and turned her into the perfect wife for America's rebel. How's that for long-term planning? Dr. Nick backed toward the door, but Elvis's voice stopped him. You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought I was free. I thought all those pills were helping me cope with the pressure of fame. I never realized they were the pressure. From his pocket, Elvis pulled out a small recording device, sophisticated equipment he'd purchased through channels that bypassed his usual handlers. For weeks, he'd been documenting conversations, recording phone calls, gathering evidence of the conspiracy that had stolen his life. I've got Colonel Parker on tape talking to studio executives about maintaining subject compliance. I've got government agents discussing my cultural influence containment. I've got pharmaceutical companies coordinating my medication schedules with intelligence agencies. Dr. Nick's face had gone pale as parchment. Elvis, you don't understand the complexity of treason? Elvis's voice rose to fill the room. Because that's what this is, isn't it? A conspiracy to control an American citizen, to manipulate his thoughts, to turn him into a weapon against his own people. The recording device clicked off. Elvis had what he needed, Dr. Nick's implicit admission of guilt, his failure to deny. The conspiracy, his obvious terror at being exposed. Here's what's going to happen, Elvis said with quiet authority. I'm going public. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence I've gathered over the past month. The American people are going to learn how their government, their entertainment industry, and their medical establishment conspired to control their king. They'll destroy you, Dr. Nick whispered. Your reputation, your career, your life. My life? Elvis laughed again, but this time with genuine amusement. Doc, I haven't had a life since 1956. What they'll destroy is their puppet. And frankly, I'm tired of dancing on strings. The phone rang. Both men stared at it, knowing it would be Colonel Parker or the studio heads, or perhaps someone even more dangerous, someone who'd been monitoring their conversation through the sophisticated surveillance system that had been watching Elvis's every move for decades. Elvis walked to the window overlooking Las Vegas, the city that had become his permanent stage, his glittering prison. Below, millions of lights twinkled like stars, each one representing someone who believed Elvis Presley was free, successful, living the American dream. You know what, Doc? Elvis said without turning around. Let it ring. I'm done taking orders. The phone continued its urgent cry as Elvis began planning his escape from 23 years of golden chains. Tomorrow, he would hold a press conference that would shake the entertainment industry to its foundations. Tomorrow, he would tell the world how America's rebel king had been secretly enslaved by the very system he'd seemed to conquer. But tonight, for the first time since he was 21 years old, Elvis Presley's mind belonged entirely to himself. The puppet was about to cut his own strings. The press conference Elvis Presley planned for August 17, 1977, never happened. The recordings he'd made vanished from Graceland within hours of his death. The evidence he'd gathered disappeared into filing cabinets that would remain sealed for decades. Official reports blamed prescription drug abuse for his death, but they never asked why those prescriptions were necessary, who coordinated their dispensation, or what interests were served by keeping Elvis chemically compliant for over 2 decades. The king of rock and roll died just as he'd lived his adult life, surrounded by handlers, controlled by contracts, and silenced by systems bigger than any individual. His rebellion had been carefully managed, his independence systematically eliminated, his voice filtered through layers of corporate and government control. Perhaps the greatest tragedy wasn't Elvis's death, but his life 23 years of golden imprisonment, where the most famous man in the world was never truly free to be himself. The puppet strings were finally cut, but only because the puppeteers no longer needed them, ready to discover more hidden truths about how power really operates behind the scenes of fame. Join our investigative community for exclusive access to declassified documents, insider testimonies, and the real stories behind America's most controlled celebrities. The truth about who really pulls the strings is waiting to be exposed.